So I am first, my name is Bill Moyer, and I am the director of Backbone Campaign and Solutionary Rail. And the Solutionary Rail project is an attempt to put rail back in service of the public interest rather than private profit. And it's, we did a book in 2016 on electrifying railroads. We were concentrated on the Northern Transcon from the Chicago to the Puget Sound. And we also, learned that like co-location of transmission on rail rights of way would be a cool thing. And that, and we've learned over time that, also the mode shift of people and goods onto rail lines. But we've been confronted over and over again by the harms of rail does to communities and the harms of our freight system, and have been deeply involved with some really amazing work by the coalition, the Moving Forward Network, and its members. It's a Moving Forward Network is a led by community-based organizations, and they invite other folks like Solutionary Rail to participate, and we're honored to be part of that coalition. And for Earth Day, it seemed like a really opportune moment to invite some of those allies and allies from our interactions with labor and community safety to come to a shared table, and not a shared table where everybody's a rail fan that just is a foamer, that we don't just like start foaming at the mouth every time we see a train. We actually have a lot of people here have very complicated relationships to rail and the freight system in general, and so and have spent a good deal of their life energy now working to fight to stop the harms in their communities and other communities and to workers. But one thing that unites this group of people is they're not merely opposed to the current system as it is. They are actively working to change that system, they see the promise in what a rail system and a transport system, an economy, a society that we could have. And they're doing the hard work in their communities and in their organizations to help make that happen. So I know that a lot of the folks who are participating in this call are have a lot of experience with the railroads, and we've all been learning a lot from each other over the years. I just think this is a unique opportunity to introduce some of the voices that we have not really gotten to hear very much from in the podcast, with one exception, and that we're going to be looking forward to featuring in the coming months. And when I say the podcast, I'm referring to Reconnect America. So today, this is our Solutionary Rail Earth Day special, and it's about an emergent vision for pivoting from harm to benefit by transitioning U.S. rail from private profit to public purpose. And I would say from fossil fuel power to electrified rail. So here we are. I want to go down the list. It's a little bit daunting. This is kind of an intimidating group of guests to have, I have to say. Ryan Calbreth is an organizer for the Green Locomotive Project, a national initiative put forth by United Electric, Radio and Machine Workers of America, otherwise known as UE, to clean the air in freight yards and rail-adjacent neighborhoods. For almost 3 years, he has worked to build coalitions between UE members and the environmental justice movement. Ryan was born and raised in San Bernardino County. He is the child and grandchild of public school teachers and proud California Teachers Association retiree. So welcome, Ryan. I'm going to go through all the bios, and then I'm going to hand it off to y'all to build on it. Tabitha, let's introduce you next. Tabitha Tripp, campaign director for Public Rail Now. Tabitha is an artist, activist, and the wife of a track foreman in Southern Illinois. She's been with the Public Rail Now campaign since its inception. I think, did I say campaign director for Public Rail Now? Her passion for Public Rail Now is rooted in her longstanding advocacy with grassroots groups to support just transitions for labor and clean energy solutions for a sustainable future. And she's been doing that for 13 years. I met Tabitha through her work with Railroad Workers United. And I've always been just super impressed by Tabitha's capacity to listen to different perspectives and facilitate bringing together collaboration and build solidarity. All right, I'm going to go on to Andrea Vidaurre. Andrea Vidaurre is the co-founder, policy analyst, and advocate at People's Collective for Environmental Justice. All these links are going to be in the chat. Andrea grew up in the unceded territories of the Tongva, also known as the Inland Empire of Southern California. She has lived at the intersections of multiple issues, which led her to engage in work that advances her community's quality of life. Andrea is a 2024 Goldman Prize winner. She is the North American 2024 Goldman Prize winner. And from the Goldman Prize website, it says, Andrea Vidaurre's grassroots leadership persuaded the California Air Resources Board to adopt in the spring of 2023 two historic transportation regulations that significantly limit trucking and rail emissions. It is an honor to be, as always, to be alive and be joined by Andrea Vidaurre. All right. The fun never ends here. Thank you, Andrea. Mark Lopez, for crying out loud. We had to go like to the who's who of EJ to create this panel. Okay, Mark Lopez, community organizer and special projects coordinator at East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. Now, Mark has also served as the ED, but as the humble and horizontal organization that East Yard is, Mark is laying back and doing the special projects work now. But for 6 years, he was the ED there. He was raised in the Madres del Este de Los Angeles, Santa Isabel, Mothers of East LA Santa Isabel, Malisa, an organization co-founded by his grandparents, Juana Beatriz Gutierrez and Ricardo Gutierrez. This is an amazing story that set the trajectory for Mark as an activist, but also Mark shares this, and I just got to see a documentary with this. Mark does a beautiful job sharing the story of his family and his community, and it's called "Carry What We Cannot Keep." It's the first episode of the Moving Forward Network's new docuseries, The Lines We Live On, meaning the lines of the freight system. So that'll also be there. So Mark was also awarded the Goldman Prize for North America in 2017. So you can see why I'm a little intimidated by this crew. So this was for his work persuading the state of California to provide comprehensive lead testing and cleanup for East Los Angeles homes contaminated by a battery smelter that had polluted the community for over 3 decades. So Mark has earned a master's degree in decolonizing environmental justice and so much more, but I'm going to leave it at that because Mark, that's just enough. We don't want your head to get too swollen anymore. Okay. All right. So our next wonderful leader is Jess Connard. Don't even say it any other way. Jess Connard. She'll kick your ass if you mispronounce it, or she'll just make a really funny face online. Because whenever I see that, I'm like, oh, that person mispronounced Jess's name, and we're not going to say the other way. Anyway, Jess started a new organization called railwatch.net. So I hope everybody's going to go check that out. Jess brings a unique background as both a medical speech pathologist and frontline activist. Her expertise spans rail safety, chemical transport regulations, and community organizing, with a special focus on helping communities understand and navigate complex regulatory systems. That's kind of her old bio, and I'm going to transition to her new bio. Is Jess Connard is a community leader, because what's really important is Jess was directly impacted by the East Palestine derailment, and she is turning her firsthand experience and getting quite a bit of reach and success of doing, reaching out and as a champion. She's using her firsthand experience and translating that into a national movement for rail safety. Uh, so Jess partners with rail safety groups and enthusiasts who have spent years in the trenches of rail safety advocacy and built the foundations of this work. So Jess aims to complement and collaborate to build community power that will keep our trains on tracks and our communities strong and our community safe. So now I'm going to give you all a turn to introduce yourselves and, if possible, to share your personal connection to rail and how it has drawn you into the work you're currently engaged in. Like, what's the problem of the current freight rail system that your work is trying to address? And I would take volunteers, but I think I'm going to go to Mark instead. I'm going to just put you on the spot, Mark, because I know where your house is. And so we're going to have to unmute you, but I think it's kind of a safe bet.
Yeah.
What drew you in?
Yeah. So thank you, Bill, for that wonderful welcome. I feel like I should have run out of behind some curtains and run onto the screen or something with that intro. Um yeah, as you were sharing, and thank you, Molly, for dropping the link in the chat. Um I grew up in the movement. My grandparents, right, were co-founders of the Mothers of East LA, Santa Isabel. And so I grew up just like everyday activities, weekends, was doing community organizing, was doing community building, off the fact that my grandma and my mother were my primary caretakers, and they were leaders in the movement, so I was just along with them, right? um and so I as I got older and I stepped into my own leadership, what really got me with rail was going to an East Yard workshop, and I was sharing this recently at the movie screening, um because I had been involved in the movement all of my life, but I had never really thought about rail. I had thought about freeways, because my family has been displaced multiple times because of freeway construction in LA. But I never really thought about rail, even though I live by, two of the biggest rail yards in the world. Um, Even though every single day I have to cross railroad tracks, multiple railroad tracks to go anywhere or do anything. It's just not something I thought about until I went to a workshop that was hosted by East Yard, that Isela Ramirez, who's now the executive director of the Moving Forward Network, our national network. She was leading that workshop. Um, that I really understood global goods movement. And then I went home, and I got out of my car, and I heard the train horn for the first time. And it was a moment that stunned me. Even right now, sharing it gives me chills, because up to that moment I had never thought about the trains. Um, it was so normalized that this blaring horn, which obviously I'd heard a million times in my life, was just background noise, the way, maybe a helicopter flying in my neighborhood is, or the sound of trucks or even sirens and stuff. It was just background noise. And so from that moment on, I was like, okay, I need to keep coming to ECR stuff. I need to better understand this. And then, of course, when it comes to the health impacts, in my community, we have tons of sources of contamination. It's not just rail. And so it's hard to tell whether the cancer, the asthma, the different health issues that come up, who can you even attribute that to, right? Now, in my community, we have like 350 in a million uh, cancer threat because of the rail yards. Um, but it's not something that we're necessarily always pointing the finger at as everyday people. And so I think East Yard really got me paying attention and activated on this issue. And the train passes by my house multiple times a day. It's about a block away. Um, and so I've gotten committed over that time.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to ask Tabitha. I'd like to invite you to talk about how your life intersects in a unique way with rail, and then yeah, however you'd like to build on that.
So, hi everybody, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this. So, like Bill said, I did start out in environmental activism like 15 years ago when fracking was a thing happening in Illinois. It tried to be a thing. And so after that, kind of we passed some moratorium and some laws. So I kind of got the gist of like how important water is because I have a well water, right? And then we learned out about all those bad chemicals that they bring in for fracking. And then I took a break and I joined Railroad Workers United because my husband is a track foreman on the Blueford Sub on the Canadian National. And so he's a railroader of 23 years now. And so I learned a lot by joining RWU from going from the environmental standpoint over to the labor standpoint, right? And so there's that switch that happens where you learn about the other side. You can't just be all tree hugger all the time. We got to come to a solution together because there's only one planet. And so in the mix of things, I helped RWU with the strategy for their public rail ownership campaign. And 3 years later, we branched out and we became our own entity, and we're now Public Rail Now. And so what we're doing is we're fighting for a public rail system that operates in the public interest, not for private profit. And so part of what that entails is building a broad network of intersected groups that are impacted by rail, whether you live on the trackside community or whether you are somebody that's a farmer who relies on these smaller lines and rail coming to pick up your grain, whether it's bringing you fertilizer, whether it's some of those awful nasty chemicals that they ship. Like we all have to figure out a way to make this the safest, most environmentally friendly method of transportation so that we get the things that we need in the world that we've become accustomed to. Now, a lot of environmentalists will probably like to skin me alive because of what I'm saying, because I'm like, it's not that I want to do away with all those things, because to do away with all those things means that some of us would not then have a job. And so I don't know, it gets kind of hairy, right? But
Right.
we all know, I mean, maybe people don't know on this call, but rail is the most efficient, the most environmentally friendly way to move freight across the United States. It's much cleaner than trucks. And you can't, like, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense about why the railroad has done all this. The problem being is that PSR and it runs on greed, right? And so they're trying to do away with jobs. They're trying to do with safety mechanisms. They're putting AI in for track inspection. They're doing away with the jobs that are needed to keep the railroad running safe in order to keep us all health on the outside, like East Palestine. Like if there would have been more people in that break room when that guy took his lunch, we would have known that there was a problem with the hot boxes. So like it's just a huge mess. And so like trying to find solutions in all that so we can stay safe and healthy on this planet together. So
Right on. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tabitha. It's what you're getting to, and I think we're all starting to really understand is how the current system is fueled by greed, and that the decisions that are made are not about investing in the kind of improvements we want. They're about short-term profits for a small group of shareholders who get their in stock buybacks. So thanks. So I'm going to invite Ryan to go ahead and say a little bit more about himself and his work with UE.
Hey everybody, I'm with the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America. We're a national, small d, democratic, independent, and fighting union, and my assignment is the Green Locomotive Project. Our membership includes both rail crew drivers throughout the country and locomotive manufacturing workers at a place called Wabtec, formerly GE Transportation, and was acquired by Westinghouse Air Brake Technology. And the Green Locomotive Project is all about uh, trying to get better working conditions for those drivers and bringing work into the shop for our members who build the locomotives. And through that, we got to build coalitions with the environmental justice organizations of this country who have been really pushing for the adoption of the best available technology by the class ones. Um, Personally, don't really have a whole lot of connections to trains. I'm no sociologist, but growing up in Yucaipa, there's a reason why there's no rail yards in the predominantly white community in the foothills of Big Bear, compared to the density of rail in other parts of the IE. And I think trains are cool. My parents went to school up north, and they told me about this magical place called the Bay Area where you could ride the BART between cities and not have to get onto a crowded freeway. Um, and yeah, other than that, as you mentioned, Bill, my parents are teachers for 30 years apiece. And they were also sports coaches. My dad coached baseball for about 25 years. And their coaching staffs were kind of our extended family. And so one of these baseball coaches that my dad worked with for 15 plus years was a train master at the West Colton Yard, Union Pacific Yard in the IE. And when I first got this job, I got lunch with him at a diner, and I'm sitting across the table. He was always kind of a soft-spoken guy, but at this point, he's worked such absurd hours in the yard. He has taken on so much exhaust into his lungs and into his bodies from his work in the train yard that you can't hardly hear him when he speaks. Even though I was just sitting across the table from him, so that's about my closest personal connection growing up. And obviously, since taking this job, I've built relationships with so many of our workers, and you know, learned a lot from them, learned so much from the people on this call, Mark, Andrea, their colleagues, and yeah, what's already been said is absolutely accurate. There's a small handful of people that are using what ought to be a public good for their private means, and only theirs alone, and there's untold suffering as a result of it, and only together can we have the power to do something about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, it's an interesting angle that you have a viewpoint in terms of working also with the folks who are going to be manufacturing, and we're dying to manufacture, hundreds of locomotives, 1,000 locomotives a year. I think I heard UE say that they could potentially do in the GE plant in Erie, Pennsylvania, but they're not, because they're not investing in either even cleaner locomotives, not to mention electric locomotives. So thanks for your work there, and welcome. Jess Connor, I would like you to invite you to go next. Tell us a little bit.
Hey, Bill. Hey, everyone. I'm so honored to be on this webinar. I'm like swooning a little bit at the panelists here. My name's Jess Connard, and I am the founder and executive director of Rail Watch. I am native from East Palestine, Ohio, where all of my family lives and has lived for many generations. I lived on a street that was named after my family, and wanted to raise my family there. Um, I was a medical speech language pathologist for 15 years prior to the train derailment, February 3rd, 2023, and the purposeful, intentional, and unnecessary burn of 114,000 gallons of vinyl chloride that was spilled into a ditch and went into our protected waterways. And they decided to call that a success after they lit it on fire. So, um, I have, for the past 3 years, worked diligently to bring attention to the issue. I've stood toe to toe with the acting president of the United States. I have stood next to celebrities and people in power, decision makers, and been in rooms where decisions are made. And yet, we still have no organized medical response in my community. We have not been able to get an emergency declaration. And my message has been that this was preventable. I keep hearing that the train derailment was preventable, and that we have legislation in place. Our tax dollars go to pay for legislators to sit in a room and to write this legislation in times like these that we can then implement. And yet, here we are, unable to implement them. So I continued on this journey and was eventually hired by an anti-plastics organization and was able to get paid for the work that I was doing. During that time, I worked on 12 different campaigns locally and ran one national campaign to ban vinyl chloride, which we ended up getting named to the Toxic Substance Control Act under the Biden administration. The 12 campaigns that I ran locally were to oppose chemical recycling facilities. We won 9 of them across the country, which was great, and the other 3 are still going. At the beginning of this year, I decided to separate myself from that work and launch something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm not going to cry. Rail Watch is a fiscally sponsored organization, and the goal of Rail Watch is to prevent train derailments by using communities' concerns and turning them into action. And a couple of weeks ago, we were able to do that very successfully in the District of North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, where we utilized zoning laws to prevent 1,000 rail cars of the chemical chlorine, World War I chemical weapon, from traveling into a metropolitan area, the Lower Mainland, of 3.1 million people, and that will sunset in the year 2030. So very exciting that we were able to do that already. I'm stoked to be on this panel, and I can't wait to hear more about you guys' work. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jess. So stoked that you're part of this. Okay, Andrea, you're up now. Can you please? I'm gonna actually warn you ahead of time. I'm gonna ask you to do a little bit of introducing yourself and the impacts of rail and some of your work maybe, and then I might jump right back in at you and ask you another question. So be warned.
Okay.
So now hopefully you're really nervous.
Ready.
I know. I know how nervous you get.
I do, especially in front of you. Okay.
Not.
Okay, cool.
All right.
I don't know. I hope I don't have a lag. Am I okay?
You're good.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Hey everybody, my name is Andrea. I'm born and raised in a place called the Inland Empire. It's about an hour east of LA. And it's a place where it's like the only place where two railroad company tracks cross, which is BNSF and Union Pacific. It's kind of really inevitable to ignore rail in the Inland Empire because it's everywhere. I mean, it lines the freeways. There's tracks that go on top of people's homes, on top of people's schools, in where our streets are at. I mean, a lot of these cities out here were literally built by the rail yards in a way, right? And they're adorned and celebrated within these cities, all over the place. And so it's kind of hard to ignore them. I got into this work mostly around because I got concerned with a lot of the warehouse growth that was happening in my community, and the trucking that kept growing. But over the years, I got to learn more and more about how that's directly connected to rail expansion. And it wasn't until I started doing some of this environmental justice work that I did learn more about rail. And one of the first things I got to learn about was what communities had already been doing in the Inland Empire to raise awareness about rail pollution. One being this giant health study that one of the universities did, Loma Linda University, where they monitored the air quality and black carbon impacts that were coming from the BNSF rail yard in San Bernardino. It was one of the first studies that had been done in the area, and they had found a bunch of cancer clusters in the region. So basically, some of these zip codes experiencing, 7 to 10 years less of life just because of the zip code they live in and their proximity to the rail yard. So rail yards, as of right now, are extremely life-threatening. even more so if you're within miles of these rail yards, because the impact just isn't behind someone's house. It actually expands miles away. And so learning that over the past couple of years, I've been able to build with our organization, the People's Collective for Environmental Justice. We've been able to meet and build with neighbors that live right next to some of these rail yards who are really holding the line and resisting the growth of this type of rail in their communities, and successful at times. Um, and I think all of us here know how life-threatening it is. I mean, we've the statistics, of course, but it's also just the stories we hear. Like, it's really hard to go into any room when we bring people together that live by a rail yard and not hear about cancer or not hear about asthma or not hear about a life that's taken too soon. Even if no study had been done, you would just know by talking to people that this is the everyday experience. And so together, though, I think our goal, right, is that I think we all believe a different system can exist. We also know a different system can exist. And I guess the one benefit that we have from all being connected to these rail lines is that we're all connected in a different way. The train that's going through San Bernardino and Colton's probably going up into the Midwest and into the East Coast, and we're all connected through these lines. And so we get to learn from each other about what's going on and what can be possible. And I'll just say, and I think I heard it from Jess, you talking about how preventable deaths. Um, yeah, there's so many preventable deaths from derailment, but there's also so much preventable deaths from rail and how it's being moved now, right? We know rail can be moved in a way that's safe and clean. There's just no political will to do it. So, anyways, our folks are, um, that's the mission, is how do you create a system that doesn't harm anymore in our community? So there you go, Bill. Hit me with your next one.
Well, you ready? I was almost like, wow, that's so much to carry. Maybe I should give her a break. But, well, no, let's pivot. Like, okay, so you saw a problem. You recognize that it could be different, that this is not inevitable. And you, through your work with CARB, et cetera, or forcing CARB to make changes, you started to work around the issues of electrifying the at least the drayage system. Or could you speak more about that? Both, maybe start with the first step of electrification work that you had done, and then maybe move into this new exciting work around Alameda Corridor.
Okay. I'll talk
Is that
a
too
little bit
much?
about carb. No, I'll talk a little bit about carb, but I probably might pass the Alameda corridor stuff to my friend Mark. But yeah, I can talk about what we have done at CARB, right? So CARB is the California Air Resources Board. It's our statewide agency that is supposed to regulate the air and protect public health. And really, this is the work that's been done over the last couple of years is the product of communities that have been living along rail yards for like 10, 20, 30 years, who have been calling for zero emissions, have been calling for electrification of these rail yards for a very long time. And their work over the last 20 to 30 years really set us up to a place where CARB had said, finally, okay, let's explore what does it look like to regulate the rail yard, right? What does it look like to actually regulate locomotives? And so in California, there was a couple of years spent where we were able to bring in the expertise of local communities in our neighborhoods, other communities such as Mark's community and other communities across the state were bringing their expertise to CARB to talk about the need to transition all this old technology. And at the end of that rulemaking, what we got was a unanimous vote that approved basically forcing BNSF and Union Pacific to take out all their tier 0 and tier 1 switchers by a certain year, right? And these are the dirtiest, the ugliest, the most polluting trains that exist, which BNSF and Union Pacific still use to this day. And it was actually going to force them to take them out and actually start purchasing the cleaner diesel ones. Now, our goal, of course, isn't cleaner diesel. It's a whole transition of the system, but this was like a baby step of the way there. It was also going to make them plan for what would electrification look like of their lines. Unfortunately, although passed unanimously at the state, when it was taken to the Biden administration at the EPA, Biden administration did not approve it. And so we were not able to pass that law in California. But that's okay, right? Like that it just means that the next demand is going to be a bigger one, right? And we gear up for something bigger than that. But I think it was proof though that there is opportunity to be able to actually force these companies to spend the money, invest, and clean up their operations. So that's a little bit of the past work, but we're in a new phase now, which you mentioned, Bill, which is we have electrification opportunities here. So I'll pass it to Mark, I think, because I think he could speak really well on Alameda.
Yeah, so the Alameda corridor is a mostly below grade short rail line that goes from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach up to the rail yards that are in East LA. So it's about a 20-mile stretch. And when this project was proposed, um, there was a promise to electrify the corridor. And so, of course, this was decades ago and was seen as something that was um, really the future of rail. Um, and then once it was built, not electrical, um, there's been no serious conversation publicly about electrifying the corridor. And so we've um, over the years have brought it up as other rail yard freeway expansion, as other projects are being proposed. um we constantly point back, well, what about the Alameda corridor? What about electrifying the Alameda corridor? What about maximizing the Alameda corridor? Especially when we were fighting a freeway expansion. We're talking about a freeway that goes from the ports of Alley and Long Beach directly to the rail yards in East LA. And that freeway is currently 8 lanes wide, and they wanted to make it 16 lanes wide. And we're saying, how are you going to do that when the Alameda corridor is only running at 30% capacity? And so you shouldn't think about adding another lane until you maximize the use of the Alameda corridor. And with that, electrify it, right? And so in our fights for indirect source rules for warehouses that a lot of folks like Andrea out in the IE led, with the rest of us kind of in solidarity, as we moved into the rail yard ISRs, and then we moved into the port ISR. It's the port ISR that's been the most difficult. The South Coast Air Quality Management District has
And
not.
sorry, Mark, just to
Yeah.
clarify for folks who don't know what an indirect source is, could you just quickly give
Yeah, so the
that?
idea is that a warehouse, a rail yard, a port currently doesn't take any responsibility for the trucks, for example, that go visit those facilities. They don't take any responsibility for those emissions. And so our argument is that they wouldn't be there, they wouldn't be in our community if these warehouses weren't in our communities, if these rail yards weren't in our communities, if these ports weren't are in our communities. And so this is pollution that is related to those activities, and therefore these facilities need to take responsibility for that pollution. Thanks for that, Bill. And so our air district isn't really wanting to do anything about the port pollution. The port, of course, is not wanting to do anything about it. The mayor of LA does not want to do anything about it. And one of the things about being in coalitions with each other, being part of networks, we understand that anything that we're doing is something that other communities are looking at and is potentially benefiting, right? And so Andrea actually was the one who kind of threw out the challenge on like, hey, what's up with this Alameda corridor y'all got over there? Like, is that something that is there an interest in really lifting up a campaign to electrify it, because we haven't really had that in the past. We've had elders in our movement who have talked about arguing for it, and as I said, in relation to other proposed projects, but a full-on campaign hasn't really been lifted. And so Andrea and the PSEDGE folks kind of threw down that challenge And we're picking that up because it is in our communities, right? And it's something that will benefit our communities, but then the next fight becomes stretching that electrification from our community to Andrea's community. And then the fights that come after that is the rest of the rail network, right? And so, as I mentioned, there's entities who really are responsible for the electrification of something like the Alameda Corridor or the ports themselves, and there's just a lack of willingness to move on them. And so we just recently joined the community advisory board for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and so we're pushing them now to think about equity, to think about sustainability, not just in changing out the light bulbs, but in changing the ways in which this infrastructure is powered, right? And I think that is the kind of future of our fight here.
Wow, that's so cool. When I first met Angela Logan, a respected friend and veteran of these fights, he took me on a walk towards along the side of the Alameda Corridor and showed me this triple track trench that was already primed, ready for built to be electrified, that never was. And it I'm so excited about this campaign that y'all are doing, and so yeah, thank you. And I think that's a great way to invite Ryan back into Ryan. You're working with the union and the workers who would be building some of these locomotives potentially. And I understand, have you been involved in this Alameda fight as well?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a short line rail that services both ports, the Port of Long Beach and Port of LA, called the Pacific Harbor Line. For now, there's actually a struggle there too that we don't have to get too into, but basically there's a shell company co-owned by UP and BNSF that's trying to take over that contract.
Wow.
And increase their monopoly power even more. But yeah, so we've got members that are in these ports, as well as members that are in places like Watson Yard and kind of the surrounding areas right by the ports there. And yeah, we're in solidarity with these EJ orgs as they're pushing for electrification. And kind of the immediate step there is we're going to the Alameda Corridor Transit Authority, a board that governs the Alameda Corridor, and as far as we can tell, so far has been dedicated to keeping it underutilized, and we'd like them to change that. And the coalition continues to grow. I just dropped a letter off at the Orange County Los Angeles Building Trades building. Hope to hear from them soon. This is a opportunity to have labor and EJ wins on the same project. We're trying to make jobs, not take jobs, as maybe the media or some politicians would like to make it seem like the environmental justice movement is always trying to do. And this is a really clear-cut opportunity. And if I can say, the pivot to these specific sites of electrification is to set up these bigger fights later on. Because when we were having these fights at CARB and the Air Quality Management District for the rail rules, the thing that gets thrown around a lot is this technology is not viable. This doesn't exist. This doesn't exist. And so we go and we do the research, we get the funding, we have this really clear-cut example of implementation of zero emissions electric rail. And that way, when it comes back around to the bigger fights, we have these examples to point to inform that decision making.
Yeah, and not just in California, because we're all looking for these, prototype, these places of proof of concept spots. And so the fights that you all and often are leading the way in California, you're a special place, right? But you are really like opening new ground for us and setting an example that others can learn from. And I know we've got amazing EJ and labor allies all over the country who are just doing great work, right? Folks in New Jersey, folks, it's all Chicago, all over the place. But yeah, I'm so grateful for you all and this work. Mark, I'm going to pivot to actually Jess, but I want to just call out this idea that agencies are supposedly defending people's health by like whatever, like getting them, like, what did your example was something they do, right? Like,
Yeah. So
like,
I talk about how they're supposed to be regulatory bodies, right? They're supposed to create regulation to protect our health, but they really transformed into funding bodies, into getting some state funds that then they distribute out to whoever, whatever polluting company or whatever nonprofit who will take it to kind of create a cover for real regulation, for real opportunities at enforcement of reducing emissions, and that's what we've seen for the last decade here. Like regionally, but it's also happening at the state. When we're fighting for policies, they're looking at how can we just spread a little money around, kind of like a corporation. How can we just spread a
yeah,
little money around and not really have to do anything?
right. Yeah, well, seems like a really savvy move to join that water board, if that, or whatever the board that you just
Hmm.
mentioned. Yeah, because I mean, really, to protecting health, I think that's a good pivot to Jess, to thinking about really investing in the health of communities. Has to be include not derailing poisonous trains that explode and kill people. And I just want to remind that you said something to me about the one of the agencies came in and said, "Yeah, we're ready to help you with your cancer treatments, rather than stop the cancer from happening." So why don't you take it from here and talk about a little bit about what you think is possible in terms of accountability, what you're working on related to derailments and community safety.
Absolutely. So we hear this term now, polycrisis. That's kind of the new buzzword. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of people, depending on what you care about, where you come from. And I do think that East Palestine is its own polycrisis because there were so many issues just right off the bat between trains and chemicals and health and decisions, the way that they've been made and the way that money was thrown around and legislation. You could really just take this crisis and catalyze it into so many really lots of opportunities for other communities. And when I started to look at this holistically, that was, something that really drew me into launching Rail Watch. So I have my little community mapping tool that I make for communities that they reach out and, they want to turn their concern into action. And one of the things that I sort of stepped back from was really focusing on rail. And I started pulling in some of the other areas and agencies that are in place to protect us and often don't. And so one of those is, the Emergency Management Agency and being able to identify when was the last time that emergency plan was updated and how many new industries have come into the area. And so it led me back down the path of, the EPA and policy. And if you're not aware, it's really important to understand there is a comment period open now. I'm going to pitch it because the EPA is trying to deregulate pyrolysis. And if you don't know what pyrolysis is, just a quick search. But basically, they use this to burn plastic, to melt plastic, and it's a false solution to plastic waste. Okay. These standards, it's really, really important for pyrolysis to be called incineration because then it falls under the Clean Air Act, Section 129. This proposal also includes standards for air curtain incinerators and revisions for temporary use incinerators in disaster situations. So basically, they want to use the metal dumpster to burn whatever they want to in the event of a disaster, effectively taking exactly what happened in my community in East Palestine, where they drained all the vinyl chloride into a ditch and burned it. They want to turn that into a regular occurrence. They want to be able to do these open burns. So bringing it back to rail safety, because there is a point to this, is that by deregulating pyrolysis, by removing it from the Clean Air Act as incineration, it creates incentives for railroads to then transport more hazardous materials because it takes pyrolysis and that output. I don't even want to call it a product because it makes pyrolysis oil or syngas, which is equally as toxic, as well as loads of other hazardous materials that we then have to transport and dispose of. But essentially, it makes it seem like it's safe. Once again, effectively prioritizing an expeditious, self-regulating toxic system and economic benefit of, over the toxic risk. So, we have this perpetual private profiteering model and socialized risk. I'm getting all jazzed up here. So, but the idea is that we have to look at rail holistically. We can't just look at, these tracks or that curve, or, we have to really take what communities are saying and apply it to something that's actionable, much like our good friend Bill has done in his book. In case if you haven't picked it up yet, I'm still working my way through it. That was just a small pitch for Bill because we love you. But you really have to listen to what communities are saying, and you can't just walk into a community and say, "I'm here to help you with your rail safety," because there's more to the story. And I think that's the idea behind, Rail Watch and what I'm trying to instill and empower into communities, because when we let communities lead, we're going to win every time, no matter what's on the table. So I am interested, though, in why the EPA, Andrea, held that up, and I would love to chat with you more about that. Maybe that's not the right time to ask that, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think there's a lot that we can learn about, why wasn't there an emergency declaration issued in East Palestine? Why? We have those emails. It's because somebody made a decision in an email that said, we're not going to go there. And that's not good enough. And we need to figure out how to fight that, because this train derailments are regular and predictable. They happen 3 times a day. We all know this in this room. But the idea that a community is going to continue to face what not just East Palestine, because it's not an isolated incident, has gone through, but this is going to continue to happen. And we need to continue to learn from these situations that we're put in and these campaigns, whether we're winning or losing. So.
Yeah, and we got to win some. So it seems like building the power through coalition building is part of the pathway towards winning. A constituency that's not here is the Shippers Coalition, and it's a very interesting place to find alliance. But they can't support the Rail Safety Act because railroads are telling them they can't support the Railroad Safety Act. So we need to get, or they'll be retaliated against. So it seems to me like, building the broad coalition and passing things like is important, and it's also part of changing the business model. I'm gonna let Mark go respond, and then ask Tabitha a little bit, invite Tabitha to speak a little bit more to changing the business model.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Jess, for sharing all of that, because if you're not sharing that, then we're not aware that that's happening, right? And we've fought legislation here in California around pyrolysis, and it is all about burning plastic, which is just another fossil fuel. They want to create another fossil fuel stock with the plastic, right? And so I think you're exactly right when it's not just about the rail line itself, but what the rail lines are moving and the impacts that has on communities. And it's really disgusting and shocking to hear that the terrible management of a disaster in your community, the kind of result is, you know what, that worked out pretty good, why don't we make that the standard? And really at the end of the day, what it probably comes out to is that's what they can get insured, right? If they can guarantee that this is how it will be handled in the future, then that becomes easier for an insurance company. And that's terrible, because as you mentioned, Bill, none of this at the end of the day on their end is about public health. And for many of us, that's what it is on the front end.
And just to reiterate what, Bill, you were sort of trying to say when you introduced me, was the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, brought us all into a room after the derailment. It was a town hall style situation. And one of the doctors had said, you've probably been exposed to chemicals. We're not sure what chemicals, and there's really nothing we can do to treat your exposures. But don't worry, because we can treat those cancers, is what he said. And so, you couldn't hear a pin drop. And those types of, even just hearing that is going to elevate the stress. It's going to elevate those lateral aggressions, families, socialized risk. You know, there's not enough talk about the social changes that happen around disasters as well, and being able to identify ways to help these communities, not just physical health, but they might be going through, you know, domestic issues or, you know, different types of violence or divorce or, you know, miscarriage, things like that that are really emotionally grounded and really difficult to get through when you've got this, you know, disaster and geographical issue that you're thinking about. So,
Yeah.
but I appreciate your comments.
Yeah. I'm glad you all are here together. Tabitha, you're hearing a lot of these complaints that really are you know, based upon a system where the incentives are related to greed and short-term profit. And I'm very curious about what is Public Rail now, like what's its current sort of campaign, and how, what are you working on, and how do you respond to some of what you're hearing? How does it uh, connect with you?
Well, I mean, I've been like so many of you, like this just seems to be an ongoing problem, right? We are all the working class people, all of us in this space right now. We're not the rich people. And so we're all fighting this corporate greed structure and late stage capitalism. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about Public Rail now is it's actually pretty positive, albeit it's a pie in the sky idea, right? We think the public rail system in the United States should be publicly owned, worker controlled, and it's a system that lets us run the rail as a critical infrastructure, right? Just like our highways, just like our airports, just like our water systems, for the public good, open, accessible, and built for long-term national profit or benefit, not profit,
Yeah.
not for stockholders' pockets, right? And so what we envision is a rail system that is publicly owned, efficiently managed, accountable to the people, and a system that would then prioritize safety. It would prioritize reliability and accessibility for both freight and passenger, strengthens organized labor and empowers railroad workers. Fun fact, my husband has been let off work for a whole freaking month because he called one of his laborers a snitch. Like he shouldn't be laid off, but the union isn't like strong enough to withstand that sort of conversation or disagreement between workers. So we like to empower railroad workers to do more with organized labor instead of being like, you know, soft spined to these corporations in the same way that y'all were talking about how the cities don't have any strength against corporations, and the corporations like the shippers don't have any backbone against the railroad companies, because then they would be, you know, not get good rates or whatever. So like all of this to say is that if people that were using the system, running the system, were able to keep the system accountable, that we might actually have, yes, I see IWW in the chat. Exactly. It feels like we could have a much better system. Like instead of spending all this money on stock buybacks, like we could force these corporations, because they would be ours, to start to electrify, buy the clean locomotives, put in the overhead catenary where they could, where it was possible. As Bill said, adapting rail corridors for energy transmissions, because that's one of the big things that America lacks is like our transmission grid system is so far behind the times. I don't, and it's not only that, like we get back to what Jess was saying and what Mark and what Andrea was saying about health issues and health impacts. In the report that we did, Economic Case for Public Rail, fun fact here, the US stands to avert over $190 billion in public health, environmental, and fiscal costs, save up to $400 billion annually on shipping costs, create 180,000 new jobs just in the rail sector alone, and up to 4 million other new jobs throughout the economy through indirect effects. I mean, like if we own the rail system, it seems like we could turn so much around and we can make things so much better. But we have a long way to go to do that.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't be able to profit from doing a shitty job poisoning communities and with through derailments or their ongoing, exhaust emissions. So that should not be part of the business model. And so I feel very confident watching this kind of from a scene, people come together and have new conversations. And starting podcasts, starting docu series. I think we're all doing our best to tell a bigger story right now, and I think we're starting to get through. This issue of stock buybacks. For those who don't know, before 1982, it was illegal to do a stock buyback. What is a stock buyback? A stock buyback is a way of taking profits and sometimes their debt, and instead of investing it in the infrastructure to improve, to do things like electrify rail yard, to hire enough people and inspectors to make sure to do enough monitors along the trackside to keep things safe. Instead, they decide they're going to artificially increase the value of the stock by reducing the number of shares and buying back stock. So that way, they used to rely on dividends, and folks would get dividends. And in the dividend system, there's kind of an incentive for the long-term growth of the company. This is not a dividend. There's no long-term growth of the company. If the CEO talks about growing a railroad company right now, with not by merger and acquisition, but through service and competition, they get removed by these investment private capital like Ancora that can hold, like the most recent CSX example is 0.02% of the stock, and they were able to come in and change the board to get rid of the CEO. So the whole model is so fucked up, and there's just like no way to polish this shit. This is like, we need a whole slate of standards, of new vision. And I think that what's cool is folks like UE, MFN, and all its members, and got together and worked with and other labor as well, and RWU to get Senator Markey to do the All Aboard Act. And that All Aboard Act would help us towards in some of these ways. And Senator Baldwin's office is doing the Reliable Rail Service Act. And I just saw language for anti-retaliation, so that the railroads can't retaliate against shippers or short lines. And there's a co-location bill about co-locating transmission on rail corridors. So I think all these pieces are sort of lining up. And my biggest fear for this anti-Trump movement is that we're going to win, and then we're not going to know what to do next. We're going to win, but we won't have a vision. And I think you people are actually helping to define what that vision is. And together, I think we're going to deliver something that actually appeals to the best in people instead of the worst in them. So I think the public rail now, I really appreciate what you all are doing, and RWU's leadership in that. And the fact that our EJ ally, other UE was the first actual union to sign on to the public rail now at campaign when RW did initiated that. And I just feel like we're growing in our power and the power of our vision as well. And so I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited about all of your leadership and the fact that you all know each other and have the potential to be working together. I'd like to do one last final round and hear back from you. What gives you, what energizes you for this next round of the fight in terms of taking back this infrastructure and making an infrastructure that is dedicated to benefit and not allowing it to be a source of harm. So I'll let whoever was inspired to go next, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think when I see other people fired up, when I see other people who are down, who are fighting, that energizes me. And then I think also seeing young folks in the movement coming up, because Um, I was just talking to a bunch of youth the other day, and I was thinking about this idea that, like, the oldest folks in our communities can see the furthest back, but the youngest folks in our community can see the furthest forward. And so the more that we bring young folks into the movement, like, the more realistic all of this seems to me.
Nice, thank you. Well, we'll just keep everybody on the screen now, and feel free to just jump in.
Yeah, what's got me fired up is the same thing that's had Yui fired up for the last 90 years, our five core principles. Aggressive struggle. Every dime that goes in the boss's pocket is a dime that can't go into your members, and vice versa. There's no reconciling this difference, and we need to act accordingly. With the rail system, it's either going to serve the public or it's going to serve Wall Street. It can't be both. Rank and file control. MFN's membership does this. You need the workers making the decisions about what's best for their workplace. You need the neighbors making decisions about their neighborhood. Political independence. We got two big political parties in this country. Neither of them are looking out for anybody on this call, anybody watching at home, and we got to act accordingly. We got to be clear-eyed when we engage with our elected officials. And international solidarity. We've got so much in common with people who just happen to be born in other countries, and we got to stay focused on the primary enemy, and that's the Warren Buffett's, Jeff Bezos's of the world. And last but certainly not least, uniting all workers. We got to stay true to the old call of organizing the unorganized, building more workers organizations, bringing more people into the existing unions, amalgamation, bigger unions, more people fighting. LAUSD just had a great coordinated bargaining session between the principals, the teachers, and the not the classified, but SEIU, the custodians, bus drivers, etc. And yeah, that means also bringing more coalitions together. We need more EJ folks, more unions, in addition to, I don't want the urbanists out here perpetuating gentrification and racism in our cities. I want them to learn a thing or two from the environmental justice movement and getting on board. And I want more public health organizations to use their big budgets and their clout to take up these big struggles against the corporations that are causing a lot of these public health issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ryan. Jess, please.
I am so motivated by this. I want there to be like 1,000 rail safety grassroots organizations this year, like come out of the woodwork, because that's how many it's going to take. I think one thing that keeps coming up to me is, or for me, is that my anger is really loyal to me in so many ways. And that doesn't mean that my behavior is outlandish. That means that there's something in me that says, this isn't right. And I also have motivation to do something about it. And I think that's what I'm seeing more in communities, in the first 2 months of Rail Watch, talking to 19 communities in 11 different states in Canada and having all these conversations in these meetings. That was the theme, other than, hazardous materials and all the train stuff. But the theme was that they're angry and they want to be. Our job as leaders in this is to channel that into do something that will create the change that we need to establish safer communities, to establish better rail safety legislation. People are paying attention more, and I'm really excited about how we can navigate and push that into real change that can really make an impact.
Yep. And learning from community organizers, you build from the power you have to the power you need, and letting the communities lead, and let them fight for things that really touch their lives, not like abstract ideas, but things that are like make an immediate difference in their lives. And yeah, super powerful. Andrea, would you go take it from there?
Yeah, sure. It was kind of hard to go after everybody because y'all are really intense and powerful. So, which I guess is like what is energizing me is this room and the fact that we there's a bunch of people connected to these giant, dangerous lines that are all across the state and beyond, that we're all connected, wanting to do something better. And honestly, in so much pressure and and so much pressure, right? I think it also leads to so much creativity. And I think it also just like asks us to think about what's bigger. And I think at first we're like, okay, we got to electrify, we need to, put a cat in a rail, but it's so much bigger than that. And I think every time we get pushed down, we actually try to come back even bigger. And so that's what I think this moment is. And I think a lot of people talked about Green New Deals, right? But maybe that Green New Deal is evolving into like public ownership, right? Maybe that's the real climate solution, right? That like something as deep as that. So anyways, I appreciate all the different perspectives because it makes me grow what I think is possible. So thank you. I'll pass it back.
You too. Thank you.
Well, tonight on the news, I heard that the US government was going to be bailing out Spirit Airlines, right? For what was it, $500 million? And I thought, well, hell, if they can buy an airline, they can buy a railroad, right? And we can own it and we can have say in it. So it seems to me that the government just did what we already wanted them to do, just with the wrong transportation modes. So I think it's possible. But I'm only half lived through my life, right? So I've got a good 40 years to be a thorn in the side of Congress until they give us a public rail system. So that's what's got me fired up. I got a long way to go.
Awesome. Well, Diane DePrima was the poet laureate for California many years ago, and or maybe it was the Bay Area. But she has a poem called Rant, and there's one stanza in it that is my go-to. It's actually the only poem stanza, well, more or less, that I actually can repeat, but that I know or remember. But it's just kind of like jokes and poems. I'm just not that good at that shit. But this one, it's pretty easy to remember. You can all probably repeat it after me. But the only war that matters is the war against the imagination. She said it 3 times. The only war that matters is the war against the imagination. The only war that matters is the war against the imagination. All other wars are subsumed in it. And what I love about you people and about conversations like this and this work that we're doing together is we're expanding the imagination. We're increasing what are the vision of the possible, and creating the elbow room, and then the changing the political calculus to make sure that shifting the variables to make the possible inevitable. So I really just want to thank you all, express my profound gratitude for your leadership, for your friendship, for all that I've learned from you, and thank everybody who participated today and listened in. I know we didn't do Q&A. I know there was a really great chat going on, and this is going to be, we're going to post this video up at our Substack as well. I do hope that people check out the Reconnect America podcast. I mean, this is what we're building towards, right? We're working on this idea of helping to, and I know there's, I can't wait to start checking out the Public Rail Now podcast and see the next MFN episode. But I do hope that people take advantage of the work that we're doing. We're bringing in lots of folks who we wouldn't normally get to talk with in order to understand what was the history, so we can start co-authoring the future. So I just want to thank you all very much. I love y'all. And thank you to Amy and Matt for doing the back end of this thing. And we're going to just let people have a night. Take it easy. We're going to stop the recording. And anyway, thank you, everybody. Let's hear it. Let's have a round of applause for our panel, everybody.